Hi, welcome to the Student Voice Panel. I'm Kimberly Olson Fakih, Senior Editor at School Library Journal. And I have with me today Katherine Schulten, who's worked in education for over 25 years as a teacher, school newspaper advisor, literacy consultant, curriculum writer, and editor. From 2006 to 2018, she was editor-in-chief of the New York Times Learning Network and is still a contributing editor there, currently overseeing the site's writing curriculum. She can tell you more. Katherine, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, School Library Journal, for having me and Kabby and the 4 kids that you're about to meet in a minute. Just want to tell you a little bit about these books, which are the very first books ever from the New York Times Learning Network. And if you don't know our site, it's over 20 years old now, and our whole mission is to help people teach and learn with the New York Times. But I want to say one thing about this book before I forget. The cover illustration is by a 16-year-old, and that also comes from our site, and I happen to love it. Our site has been around since 1998, and at the beginning it was really about giving teachers lesson plans to help them learn how to teach with the times. But over the last decade, we have more and more moved in the direction of making the whole site about what is this book's title, Raising Student Voice, and trying to give kids a way to have their say about the issues of the day. So as you might imagine, that includes like the intense breaking news that we are all constantly buffeted by, but it also includes asking them to think about all the stuff the Times publishes across categories. So it could be about sports or fashion or science or health or pop culture or like TikTok videos or whatever. And we do that in 2 ways. We post a writing prompt every single day. We have since 2009, so there's like thousands of those things now. And they ask kids to deal with something that's in the paper that day. So for example, today on the site, we're asking about the Supreme Court. But the other way we do it is that we have 10 annual contests that invite kids to make videos or do podcasts or send photo essays or do various kinds of writing. And by far the most popular of those contests is the student editorial contest. And that is the source of the 100 excellent essays that are in this book. So you are going to meet a teacher who teaches with the contest, but more to the point is just really about student voice and very imaginative about it. And then you're going to meet 4 students who won this contest. And just so you understand the context, they won during years when we get easily 10,000 entries. These contests, they go through about 7 rounds. We have maybe 40 judges, and many of the judges are New York Times journalists. Often we get, every year we get volunteers from the New York Times opinion page who volunteer to read student essays. So becoming one of the winners is no easy thing, and you'll hear a little slice of each of their essays. Very quickly, the rules for the contest are really straightforward. Kids have 450 words to write about something they really care about, and the bottom line is they have to make us care too as readers. And I will tell you a little story about how the contest began, because we really didn't think it was going to work. We just did it because we thought it was something teachers would like. Back in 2014, when the all of the United States, all public schools were ramping up with the Common Core standards, it became obvious to us, because everybody who works on our site is a former teacher, that argument writing was going to be the centerpiece of the curriculum. It was across subject areas, up and down levels. Everybody had to do argument writing. And of course, the New York Times publishes a section every single day full of argument writing, otherwise known as the opinion section. So we knew that teachers would like the contest, but we actually thought like we were going to get the most dull writing ever, because it's not like, argument writing doesn't say fun to kids. Unlike, say, if we invite their poetry or short stories or personal essays, we just figured it would be very by the books and dry, but we knew, we'd be doing a service and kids would like it, or teachers would like it. But of course, I've had this job for 14 years now, and there's no day that I don't realize that if you say to kids, you can write about whatever you want in your own natural voice, and you're not writing for a standardized test, you're writing for actual humans to read it, they're going to rise to the occasion. So That year, 2014, we got a whole bunch of good essays, and probably 8 won. But there was one essay that just instantly, from the second we read the headline, everyone on our site knew that this contest was going to work. And it was, bless him, he's now like a full out adult because this was a long time ago, but he was a Canadian high school kid who was really concerned about gender inequity. And he wrote a great piece, full of voice, very stylish, like great argument, great evidence. But it was his headline that really told the whole story. His headline was, "Why I, a heterosexual teenage boy, want to see more men in Speedos." And we were so excited when we got it because we knew right away that it would just tell kids with one glance that, they had a little bit of freedom in this contest and it wouldn't just be like this cut and dry thing. So fast forward 8 years and now we have this whole book. And as you might imagine, kids write about every kind of thing. And some of it is stuff you might expect, like standardized tests and college admissions and race and gender, sexuality, gun control, climate change, although I will say from very interesting points of view. But we also learn new things every year as judges, and that's our favorite part of this. So for example, a few years ago, a kid wrote about the trash talk that goes on in video games, and how toxic that is, and what it's teaching a generation of mostly young men. And that was new to us. An autistic girl wrote about how her classmates never see beyond her disability. They don't know who she is, but online she's free. And then a runner-up, and I will say the opinion section people at the Times really championed this, a girl writing passionately that pineapple pizza does not get enough respect. And she was a runner-up. So you can kind of write about anything if you can defend it. Last thing I'm going to say, and then I'm going to let Kabby have his say and introduce you to these students, is that if you're thinking like, why should I have this book in my classroom or my library or whatever, it is crazy to have already signed a contract that you will write a book and even be in the middle of it before you find your actual rationale for writing it, and then only because you had a random conversation with a 16-year-old. But I think that's fitting given the choice of the book or the subject of the book. I was in the middle of writing this book and I asked some teachers that I knew if I could come to their classroom and bring a whole selection of kids' essays and just have their students who had been studying argument look at the pieces, right? They were like, sure, come on. And so the kids read them and the teacher had them in small groups and I was kind of circulating around the classroom. And I heard this one boy say to his group, he was like, we've been studying argument for like weeks now. And all we ever read, and these are his words, is stuff by like 50-year-old white guys who've been doing this their whole career. And he's like, thank God for these, because like, I can relate. I also don't feel like I have to have a graduate degree to understand them. And also they make me think of things I want to write. And I was like, oh, thank you. That's exactly why this book should exist. So if you don't know the term mentor text, which is a big term for English teachers, it basically means good examples. And the idea of this is that if you are teaching mostly 50-year-old white guys who've been doing this for most of their career, now you've got 100 new examples that are not that, and that kids can kind of emulate and not find intimidating, and hopefully that will inspire them too. And that includes the work of these four, which you will hear a bit of in a minute. Now, Kabby, Kabby's going to talk a little bit about his practice, but also maybe join in a little later. I will say I interviewed maybe 15 teachers for this book, and Kabby is definitely the backbone of the whole book. I just love how he talks about students and student voice. So Kabby, introduce yourself if you would, and tell us a little bit about why you think student voice is so important.
Perfect. Thank you, Catherine. My name is Kabby Hong, and just to give you a little bit of background, I'm an English teacher at Verona Area High School, which is a suburb of Madison, Wisconsin. It's about 1,600 students, and it's a typical suburban high school. I teach freshman English as well as AP Language and Composition. And I found this contest about 4 years ago out of desperation. We have an argument unit in AP Lang, and to be honest, the essays that the students wrote They were terrible. They were terrible, terrible to read. The kids didn't like writing them. And I never liked my argument unit. And so when I found this, I loved it for a number of reasons. One of them is when I read the past winners, they sounded like teenagers. Secondly, it was short. Previously, I had very long essays, and it was painful for me to read them and painful for the students to write. And so there are a couple of reasons why I really love this contest. One of them is engagement and ownership. I think previously students, when they write for a prompt or a topic that a teacher creates, the writing is very lifeless because they are just simply checking the box to make the teacher happy and to get a grade. So it's very transactional. And so when they actually get to pick their own topic, it changes the dynamic entirely. In the first year I did this, I thought students would jump at the chance at picking their own topic. But I found that actually it takes them a while to figure it out. And it is not easy for them to figure it out because a lot of teenagers think that their everyday cares and concerns are not worthy of an argumentative essay, especially one from an organization like the New York Times. But when I show students sample winners, for example, the example that Katherine was showing about this teenage boy wanted to see more men in Speedos, it was really about the fact that female athletes are oftentimes over-sexualized. And as a teenage boy, he really recognized the problems with that. And this was something that was relevant to him and he took ownership for, and the writing really blossomed because of that. Mm-hmm. And so I really believe that when students can find a topic that they actually care about, that is independent of their teachers, their friends, and their parents, that is authentically coming from them, it changes everything. It really does. The writing gets better. The student wants to create more drafts because they care about it. It is a joy to read because it has voice and personality. And if you talk to any English teacher, one of the hardest things to teach is voice and personality. And I realize it's because they don't have any investment in the topic. You know, if you're writing about capital punishment and you're writing an argumentative essay on it, you know, how good is that going to be? Because you just really don't have an emotional connection to that topic. So what I love about the contest is that it's kind of changed the way that I teach. So I really focus a lot on helping students find something that they can care about. And that is actually, that takes up the bulk of it. I feel like if you can help a student find a topic that they actually have a lot of emotional investment in, then it'll work beautifully. So if we can start with something that they're mad about, and I usually start there because usually most teenagers, most people are just mad about something. Something annoys them, whether it's about their friends, about themselves, about society. Usually if you start there, it's a good starting point, and then you can kind of, kind of mine that and see what else comes up. And the other thing is you start small. You know, a lot of students think that they have to have these giant revelations about great societal debates in order for them to engage in an argumentative essay. And you can write about pineapple on a pizza, or you can write about the Pledge of Allegiance, or about lawsuits over music, things that teenagers will actually be interested in and know about. Mm-hmm. And what I love about the contest is that it validates that young adults can have a voice, and they can express opinions that are just as complex and nuanced as an editorial by New York Times columnist. So that's kind of my process, and it's been very, transformative in terms of how I look at things. And the other great thing about the contest is that it's short. And actually the length, at first it used to be a barrier. I used to kind of like feel anxious about it, but now I feel like it's one of the best parts about it, because it forces students to really examine their words and what argument they're actually producing. So that's been my experience with it. I feel like it's been, you know, a really wonderful addition, and my students look forward to it every single year.
Kabby, thank you. You once said something to me that makes me laugh every time I think about it, and maybe you'll tell that story really quickly before we move on to the kids. You were telling me about a kid in your class who was writing something they thought they were supposed to write, and you were like, listen, you're not a middle-aged man at the Brookings Institute. You're a kid. Like, why don't you pick a different topic? Do you know what I'm talking about? And would you tell that story in just a second?
Okay, so I had this student, and I'll just call him Stan. Stan is a funny kid. You know, he's a kid that every day made me laugh. And he chose to write about the Electoral College. I mean, it was a dry, boring essay about the Electoral College. And he showed it to me, and even he knew it was bad, because during peer editing, he didn't want to really look at me or even engage, which is unusual. Stan is usually very engaged. And I looked at him, I'm like, why are you writing about this? And he goes, I don't know. You know, I just picked it because it was there. And we finally like talked about it, and we ended up, he ended up writing about Chick-fil-A, cancel culture, and about his decision, because he loves waffle fries, and who doesn't like waffle fries? And he loves Chick-fil-A, and he gets a lot of grief from his friends for doing it because of its politics. So he wrote about that, and it was one of his best essays. So it was fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, I always think of that kid when I pass a Chick-fil-A, honestly, every time. Okay, I'm going to introduce our 4 panelists now, and I'm going to read just a little bit of their essay, and then I'm going to have some questions for them. But speaking of what makes you mad, I'm going to start with Anushka, and that is a perfect segue to her, because that's how her piece came to be. She was 16 when she wrote Civil Obedience. And that was in 2018. And you guys might remember that in 2018, the Parkland shootings had happened that February. And by March, schools across the country kids across the country were marching out of classes. And, you know, it was a huge thing. And Anushka says her piece came about as a rant. After something happened with her school when it totally stage managed the protest, and undermined the entire purpose of having a march in the first place. She wrote this, and I'm just going to read one paragraph from it that kind of describes how the protest went down in her school. She writes, the day before the walkout, a minute-by-minute schedule and list of guidelines, including the only 2 doors we could exit from, were uploaded onto Facebook. The next day, our obedient student body shuffled into the fenced area between our school buildings, only to witness teachers' comments about how cute we were and their apologies for being 60 seconds behind the official protest schedule. By 10:05, the end of the designated shouting time, my friends and I lowered our posters in defeat. I love the designated shouting time so much. Hello, Anishka. Okay, and next, Narain Dubey, and you'll hear from each of these people, but just so you have the context first, he was 17 when he wrote Breaking the Blue Wall of Silence, Changing the Social Narrative About Policing in America. And I think I'll let his opening words speak for him. These are his first paragraphs. As a child, I thought of police officers with veneration. If I saw a cop in the park, I felt safer. I told myself that when I got older, I'd be wearing the badge too. At 12 years old, I learned about police brutality. When I first saw the video of Eric Garner being thrown to the ground by police officers, I thought it was a movie. Despite knowing that the officers were at fault, I refused to change my internal rhetoric. I thought the media was only portraying the bad side of the people I saw as heroes. Then on July 31st, 2017, a police officer shot and killed my cousin, Isaiah Tucker, while he was driving. Isaiah wasn't just my cousin. He was also a young, unarmed African-American man. I no longer dreamt of becoming a police officer. I guess you guys should raise your hands that it's you who wrote it. I just realized. So Narayan and Anushka, will you do the same? Yeah, Thank you. Next, Ananya Udaygiri, who was 15. She just won this year when she wrote an essay called How Animal Crossing Will Save Gen Z, all about the comfort that the game provides. And here's how her essay starts. Generation Z was born in the aftermath of 9/11, molded by the economic recession of 2008, and polished off by the coronavirus, the worst pandemic in a century. And that doesn't even include the mounting crisis of climate change, or the growing nationalism, or the gun violence epidemic. Gen Z's childhood is rooted in issues that would be unrecognizable only a decade prior. We are no strangers to a fight. So what drew us to a Japanese video game about living in a village with anthropomorphic animal neighbors? Like moths to a flame, or perhaps more appropriately, like children to their first love, Animal Crossing has captured the teenage heart. And Ananya, you want to raise your hand? Yeah, okay. And finally, Nora Fellows, who was 16 when she wrote Lessons for the 2020 Democratic Presidential Candidates from a soon-to-be first-time voter. And fast forward, she is now going to be that voter, right, Nora? Yep. I won't give away her advice for the candidates. You have to read the essay yourself, but I'm going to give you her opening. I am one of more than 5 million people too young to vote today, but who will be old enough in 2020. I'm 16, I run a political blog with over 100,000 followers, and I'm offering some free lessons to candidates on how they can earn our votes. Given the slim margin in the 2016 election, our votes could make all the difference. So listen up. And I end with so listen up, because now I'm going to shut up and I'm going to ask you guys some questions and have your say. So my first question, and this will be for all of you, you have about 2 minutes each to talk, but if it just becomes a conversation, that's fine. But I will start with Anishka, you. How did you find your voice as a writer, whether you want to talk specifically about this essay or what led up to it? Go ahead.
Yeah, so personally, throughout high school, I never considered myself much of a writer. I loved debates and discussions and debriefs with people where I could talk things out, but I always struggled with translating my stream of conversation or words in open space to words on an actual page. So when it came to English assignments or opportunities like this very contest, I didn't really approach my computer until I've already formulated most of what I have to say. For this essay in particular, kind of to echo what Mr. Hong said, I had no idea what I was going to write about. And I actually wanted to write about everything but what I did, because I thought it was a very tender topic. And I thought it was kind of like a no-no, especially for this one, since it was a national contest. But I ended up finding that anywhere else I tried to channel my frustration into wasn't sufficient, because I just kept falling on how frustrated I was with the way that my high school executed our walkout. But in order to kind of make sure that I didn't approach this topic in the wrong way, I discussed every possible route I could take with my friends, my teachers, and myself, and basically was talking to people for a week before I even created like a blank document to start drafting. And then after that, I kind of just write everything down as a reflection. And then I cut and edit and whittle down my piece into some presentable form, making sure to like routinely read it aloud and re-engage in conversation along the way to make sure I'm being precise and delivering what I intend to say. I kind of think of this writing process to maintain my voice as like my brain being this box of like 50 mixed puzzles, and all the pieces are stored in one place and there's no way to distinguish them. So I have to lay them all out in these conversations and these reflections I'm writing. And then I like carefully bring that together and kind of remove whatever miscellaneous there is on the side. It's definitely a convoluted process, but I think it works well for someone who's less confident in the writing, because it forces you to dedicate time and attention towards a topic and piece that you're working on. And you literally translate your voice aloud into your voice on paper. So it's especially crafted.
Thank you. Wow. Good tips if any students are watching. Narayan, let me go to you next. How did you find your voice in general or specifically for this essay?
Yeah, well, I think, Kabby, you mentioned this earlier, but for me, it was really about finding something that I was actually engaged in, something that I was mad about or emotional about. I think a lot throughout my high school experience and even now in college is focused on removing bias and removing personal experience from your writing, whether that's analytical essay or an unbiased news story, for example. They don't want the I statements, the I believe, I want, I think. But I found that, you know, when I was writing an editorial, I originally wrote my piece for my high school magazine. And when I was originally writing opinion pieces, I would focus on what I thought that other people were interested in or what was big at the time. But I never found what I was really focused on, what I really was mad about or what got me emotional. And until I did that, I was just putting facts and information down on paper. So when I was writing my piece about my cousin and his experience with police brutality, it was really at first just a chance for me to vent, similar to what Anushka was talking about, a chance to take your voice that's in your head and put it down on paper and organize it and see what it looks like there. But I found that in that way, I was able to actually put something together that had my voice in it, that really sounded like I believed in what I was talking about, instead of just putting down facts and information that's somewhere else on the web.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Nora.
Yeah, sorry about the blinds, by the way.
That's all right.
But yeah, I think I've always been really into theater. When I was little, I was really into theater. And I used to write like little plays that I would make my friends perform at my birthday parties, which I feel bad for them now because like maybe they weren't that into it, but I was into it. So I used to do that in like elementary school. And then with you talked about the Common Core, with the types of essays that we would do in school, I sort of like lost my sort of creative writing that I was interested in. And then in high school, I joined my high school paper. And, you know, I was writing news pieces. We had to write for every section. So I was writing sports pieces, which I wasn't super passionate about. And I think with, you know, news or sports or anything that is an opinion, you know, you are taught, like Narain said, to be, you know, to take your personal opinions out of it, obviously, and be as unbiased as possible. But then my teacher had us do the New York Times Student Editorial Contest. And that was sort of, I think, the time that I was able to find that like creative spark that I had been missing from when I used to write the little plays. Because I was able to put so much of myself into it and pick something that I was really passionate about instead of just, you know, the boys tennis team or whatever. And so I think, you know, I was able to find the creativity, and I think reading other people's stories, I read Anushka's story and I was like so inspired, really helped me see like that it could be creative and it could be funny and lighthearted, and you really could have, you know, your own voice in it. So I think, yeah, this contest and just opinion writing in general really helped me find like the creativity in journalistic writing. And since then, like I've done a lot more opinion writing, and I'm writing opinion right now at Vanderbilt. So
Love to hear it. I also want to point out in the teacher's guide to this, there's a bunch of appendix with extra stuff. And Nora was kind enough to give us her first draft, which is 700 some odd words, and then her second draft for teachers to show how she cut and really tighten things up. And, you know, because it is a thing to get down to 450 words. So Nora, I'm glad you're still writing. All right, and Ananya, you just won. This is fresh for you. How are you finding your voice?
So I think what a lot of people don't realize, or I didn't realize, is that student voice doesn't need to be something super meaningful, deep, important. It can just be something that happened to you. I wrote my essay on Animal Crossing, for example. And yeah, there are more deep, meaningful, empowering topics, but this was something that was specific to me. And leading up to the contest, I had known about the contest. I read everybody else's articles before, loved them. And so I had known about it, couldn't really see anything. The day that it's due comes along and I get a flash of inspiration in the shower. All my best ideas come in the shower. And so flash of inspiration. I tell my parents that I'm watching TV. I start writing. I turn it in maybe an hour before the deadline, but I was proud of what I put down. So student voice, it comes to you. It's part of you. And you don't need to go looking in places where you're not. It's already inside of you. And I think that was really important for me to learn. So.
Yes, thank you. And I just want to say, like, cover your ears if any young people are listening. Like, don't do what she did and wait till 1 hour before. It worked for you, but whoa. I also, though, want to say that it's not like it wasn't deep and meaningful, right? You chose a topic. You were writing about the coronavirus and how it affects people in your generation and why Animal Crossing was so soothing. And everybody got a sense of that from the first paragraph. And it is deep and meaningful. So
thank you.
It's different. Okay. We're gonna go to it like a new question and with kind of a new order. And I hope this kind of flows from it, but just thinking about like, and I guess Ananya is a good segue into this. Why is it so important now? You guys are going through the craziest year for your generation ever that's going to define you, you know, until you're like in your 90s and telling your grandchildren crazy stuff about, you know, Clorox and toilet paper and whatnot. So why now? Why is student voice especially important now? And I think Narayan, I think I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, well, I think student voice is incredibly important right now because we're clearly undergoing a generational shift. I think if I have the numbers right, it's something like Gen Z is finally reaching about 1/5 of the United States population. And so we obviously make up an incredibly large and increasingly large portion of the conversation right now. But I also think that our generation is really, especially students, is defined by compounded trauma and disruption. I mean, I think a lot of us were born around 9/11 and now we're entering adulthood during a worldwide pandemic and a national reckoning on race. And so much of our lives have so far been defined by tumult. And I think that gives us an opportunity to decide what we do with this chaos, what changes we want to make to the status quo going forward, what disruptions we want to continue to make, and what kind of organizing we want to do. And so I think our voices, our writing especially, in many cases, is incredibly important right now. We have an opportunity to decide what the next 10, 20, 50 years is going to look like, because we are literally what the future is going to be demographically and in the conversation as a whole. So
thank you. I'm furiously taking notes because you guys are, as my own children who are 23 might say, spitting fire. I was going to try to pull off that ridiculous phrase as a 57-year-old woman. Nora, go ahead. Why do you think, especially now, for student voice?
Yeah, so I think, you know, there are obviously a lot of issues happening right now, like that have already been mentioned. And I think also just politics specifically, you know, for our generation, a lot of us came into political consciousness, you know, with President Trump's election. And I think, you know, obviously it was a really unusual election, like regardless of, you know, where we stand politically. And so I think there's just been so many like huge events, you know, economic crises, the climate crisis, all of that we've really grown up with. And I think there's a lot of talk from adults. I hear this from like my parents and their friends all the time. You know, it's up to your generation to solve this climate change. That's you guys. Like, we want to hear from you. And so I think it's really, you know, if that is sort of the mentality that it's up to our generation to fix these things, then it's important that our generation feels empowered to do that. And so I think, you know, student voice is about students working through issues and feeling empowered to, you know, to take on some of these really big global issues.
Thank you. Okay, Ananya, I wish we'd more, well, I have to keep calling on you as the sole representative of high school at this point.
Yeah.
Everyone wrote this stuff in high school, but you might feel more constrained than people in college do. I don't know, but go ahead.
Yeah, it's definitely different because it really feels like we're at a crossroads based on everything that's happening. There's the future of climate change, the future of this country that's going to happen with the election. And it's sometimes hard for young people to fit into that conversation, especially since it's normally dominated by adults. But student voice still is important because it is the future. Student voice, student representation matters, our voices matter, and sometimes it's hard to get lost in the jumble of things that seem far away from us, especially in high school. But at the end of the day, it all matters, and the kids were spitting fire, so.
You definitely are. Anushka, go ahead.
Yeah, kind of to echo Ananya, I feel like a big thing is the consequence of removing students from this conversation, especially when it mostly revolves around them and involves people making decisions on their behalf. Because I feel like without their participation in what's happening for them, it kind of just discourages them from engaging and wanting to provoke change in the future. Like, obviously right now is very timely because society's blemishes are like more visible than ever. But I even find my friends and myself, like, obviously we care a lot about people's rights and the election and everything that's going on right now, but we're always consistently asking, like, okay, what can we do? And then doing this worthwhile, because at least in the past I haven't witnessed or like experienced things where me doing something provokes real change. And obviously doing something is better than doing nothing, but it's hard to engage yourself if you have a pessimistic view about whether or not you can get to this other side. But kind of like being active and like kind of trying to find your own voice and share it with other people is a nice way to show yourself that, like, oh, I can engage even in these small ways and it is worthwhile, as opposed to like wanting to dismiss it.
That is.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Sure.
We're running a little fast, and I just wanted to say I'd love Kabby's impression of why student voice is important right now. Just give, I'm thinking you're a couple of years older than the students that we're talking with right now, and may have a different perspective on that. Could we hear from you?
Oh, you are way too generous.
I get to be, I'm really old, so.
Well, first of all, I'm just blown away by these amazing young people. And I was thinking about civil rights icon John Lewis, who passed away this year. And I think if I remember right, he was 23 when he spoke at the March in Washington. And I think about how social change in our country is really driven by young people. And if you just go down the line throughout our history, it is really fueled by the activism and the energy from young people. And what I love hearing about in these essays is the feeling of a developing voice. And Anushka, I loved that introductory paragraph. That was incredible. And I think about John Lewis and his phrase, good trouble. The idea of how you had to think about, do I just be more compliant and just go along with what the school was saying? Or am I willing to cause good trouble? And I thought that phrase is really appropriate. And it's one of the reasons why I love working with young people, is that they have opinions and they have amazing opinions. And I think all of your essays really show that developing voice, which our society desperately needs, because, I think we've shown that adults aren't the best at creating the world that everyone can be happy with. So I'm just really impressed by the young people that are on this panel and also that entered the contest.
Yeah. And actually, Anishka, you sort of were getting to my next question anyway, as is Kabby, which is like you the four of you have been very confident and put your work out there and, won this contest and are probably going on to super amazing things. But like, lots and lots of kids. And how do you, like, kind of enlighten us? What are your friends or your peers or your classmates or whatever, what do they care about? And Anushka, you were talking about how, like, like you can just see it kind of bubbling up and people having ideas, but what do they care about and how are they getting their voices out there? And I'm going to start with Nora, which is appropriate because one thing I want you to talk about is the fact that, as you wrote in the essay that you sent us, you had a blog with 100,000 followers, and now you're on your school paper, and you're somebody who's really taking the reins as it is. But how do you see your peers, and what are their concerns, and how are they getting their voices out there?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the issues that we've been talking about, climate change, gun control, those are sort of issues that I think really affect young people specifically. Climate change is focused on our future. Gun control obviously connects to school and students. And so I think those are issues that young people really care about. The Black Lives Matter movement, sort of came to the forefront of our media coverage, I guess, this summer in particular. And so that's something I've seen a lot of my peers talking about. But I think the way that young people get their voice out the most is probably social media. And maybe I'm a little bit, more in social media than other people because I have my Instagram account. But I think, social media, because it's free and anyone can use it, and it doesn't take, you can go viral from anything. I think because of the ease with which anyone can use social media, it really has become this tool for young people. The March for Our Lives, that was organized a lot on social media, the climate strike, social media. And it's been a way for young people to have a platform that we otherwise wouldn't have because, you don't really see young people on the news randomly. And, outside of this competition, there aren't a lot of opportunities for young people to communicate with an audience of adults and have a platform. And so I think social media really has been, a really great way for young people to get their voices out. But obviously there are drawbacks with that because, social media can only do so much. You can't really put all of your thoughts into one, Snapchat story or Instagram post. But I really do think social media is the main tool for young people to use their voice.
Can I just ask you to follow up a little bit? How did you grow your Instagram following? And is it mostly kids, or I got the impression it was a range of people? Because this is why you were in high school.
Yeah. So I started my account in the summer after Trump was elected because I was just kind of frustrated with what was going on, and I wanted to have a place to express my frustrations. But yeah, I didn't start it with the intention of it blowing up, and then it just kind of, because of the way social media works, sometimes things blow up. So it just kind of did. And so, yeah, it's mostly, it is a very wide ranging in terms of age. The audience is very wide ranging. But I think there definitely is a disproportionate amount of young people. So people under 29 make up probably 50% of my following. But yeah, I think, I just was posting a lot of things that I was frustrated about, and it was resonating with people. I think in the past couple of years, young people, Gen Z has sort of become known as this sort of activist generation. I think that's become a label for our generation. And I think social media has facilitated a lot of that connection. But the reason I started my account was because there wasn't really there weren't a lot of, really politically active young people in my community. And so I was looking for a community that would sort of share my frustrations and my opinions. And then in the past few years, it's really exploded. And I think a lot of, young people have started political movements and have become a lot more engaged. And I think that happened a lot this summer. My account experienced a huge amount of growth this summer. Because I think people are becoming a lot more engaged.
Ananya, I'm going to ask you next. Do you see that? Do you see engagement among, the kids in your school and the kids you know?
Definitely. My friends and I were teenagers in Texas. We can't vote. There's not a lot of there's limited options of what we can do. So I definitely agree that social media is exactly what everybody's doing. I've seen, especially recently, so many more people following political accounts, reposting political things. Definitely a huge explosion of that because that's our way to communicate with everybody else. It's social media. We don't use the normal channels that other people go through. So I feel like in terms of how our generation, my generation gets our voice across, it's completely through social media at this point.
Hmm. Is there a downside to that, or what do you see with that?
There's definitely a downside in the sheer amount of information. It's overwhelming at times. It's hard to sift through things. There's not a lot of standards on regulation, how truthful things are, but it's getting to a place where social media is a real place for information. I think we're getting to that place.
Thank you. Okay. Anushka, let's go to you.
Yeah, kind of to echo both of you guys that social media is definitely taken off as a platform for people voicing their opinions and showing news, but also to get at your point about what people are passionate about right now, I find that since a lot of people are back on campus, at least for me, even if we're living off campus, people are translating a lot of the concerns they had on the national level, whether that be like mistreatment of people of color, regards to police, or maybe even like a contradiction of a university's values and what actually happens. And there's been a lot of kind of like revealing of maybe flaws at school. So I know a lot of people have kind of been frustrated with our school's dismissal of inappropriate student behavior, whether that be allowing for people to like misuse certain terms or like allow them to use like racial slurs and whatnot and kind of go unpunished. So beyond just like showing that on social media and uncovering like things that go viral on Twitter about a student X thing, people have been going to the school and going to organizations that they've been a part of and basically being like, do you agree with this, or are you going to do something and show that this is unacceptable at any level, especially a collegiate level? So that's been another way that I think it's kind of been actualized, which is nice.
Interesting. Yeah, I think you see that at every college, calling out, and even on the high school level, you see those Instagram accounts started that, are bringing justice to bear. Anyway, Narayan, you want to address?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think everything that everyone's been saying about social media is exactly what I'm seeing today too. But I think one thing for sure is just kind of the different modes of creativity that people are taking advantage of. I think for me, like art is really just any sort of outlet for your voice that you choose to utilize. And I think one thing that's been really inspiring is how people are willing to collaborate with their art and with their voices. I think right now, especially when you're seeing, the Black Lives Matter movement and protests and demonstrations, a lot of the stuff that's youth led is led in a certain way where they will ask for collaboration and contribution from artists of all kinds, from writers, from poets, from people who can cook, from people who can sing, or work with local government. And so collaboration of people in the arts and that kind of way of putting voices together, I think is what I'm seeing, and that's kind of really inspiring for sure.
So you're seeing kids your own age doing that, like from each according to his ability kind of thing. Like, can you give some examples? I'm fascinated by like the cooking or the,
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from Portland, Oregon, and there's a youth-led organization there, Fridays for Freedom, which is Black youth putting together marches every Friday, racial justice and awareness for Black Lives Matter. And that's completely youth-led. And the way that they do that is very grassroots. They'll reach out, like everyone's mentioned, through social media to find young Black or other BIPOC artists to contribute in their form. So there are people who will, you know, contribute by putting together teams of cooks or people who cook to bring food to these events, or poets who can stand up and share a poem on racial justice, or a singer to do something similar, or a writer who wants to share something on social media prior to the event. So there's a lot of collaboration by youth to put their voices together for a certain movement or purpose.
Love that. Anybody else want to jump in? If you see that too, go ahead, Anishka.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is also a bit of a byproduct of like quarantine and people having some spare time, but even people using social media as a way to create maybe little shops or accounts. I know I saw a lot of people from my hometown creating little bakeries where they would sell things, and then 75 to 80% of the proceeds would go to Black Lives Matter or other organizations. Same with jewelry or small things. And then at a lot of protests, these people kind of all showed up, and then you had it was like a lot of opportunity to engage, whether that means like you just showing up and being present in the situation, or also going and buying things and helping their like small little business, but mostly donating. So that was also another cool way that I saw a lot of people engage with the opportunity.
So imaginative. Anybody else? Maybe, Kabby, this could even include you if you see among kids in Wisconsin that you know, like, I don't know how much access you have to that outside the classroom, but.
Yeah, it's been hard because my school district actually, we're 100% virtual. So I actually haven't even seen the faces of 90% of my students because they don't even have to turn on their cameras during Zoom calls. But I will say though that the level of willingness to engage in conversations that are very challenging and very difficult about societal issues that run the whole gamut from Black Lives Matter to just about anything you can imagine is very different this year. And I think that the quarantine and COVID and the racial justice marches and the events that have happened this year have really sort of accelerated the change. We have made some dramatic changes with our curriculum, with our, I guess, willingness to kind of address these issues in the classroom, which would not have happened without COVID, would not have happened without all of the events happening with George Floyd that happened this year. So,
you know, I just wanted to jump in about youth-led turmoil in general, because not all of these are happy things, but the Tiananmen Square, if in a land of social media, would have been a much different event. And Arab Spring was one of the first times we saw what social media could bring to a revolt and a rebellion and a wish for change. And now it's just getting better and better to the point where traditional outlets like the New York Times, they really know how to run social media and keep readers engaged and to, you know, work across channels. And I really like seeing that. I like seeing the rebellion spring up. I like seeing flash mobs. I remember flash mobs were an amazing use of social media and just bringing people together to do a good thing. The bike riders, jamming the bridge to protest. And so I just feel like it's a really nice time to see what people can do when they're really mad and they have a way to express the anger. And I think the word collaboration really struck with me, Narayan, when you mentioned that. I just think that's amazing. It used to be that you would sit there and say, how can we find someone who can do this? And now you just reach out on Instagram and you find the people who can do this and bring that. And it works together. It's wonderful to watch and to participate in. So, Katherine, I think you had some more questions.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing about my own kid, though. I have twins. One lives in Burlington, one lives in Manhattan. And he was saying to me, they're 23, they just got out of college. And he said, you couldn't not be in a protest in June. If you left your house in New York, you were in a protest. And he was in a protest every day, all day. And he was showing me on his phone how many different ways he could access those protests. And in fact, he was arrested and held for 17 hours in a cell with 80 other men and no mask. You know, his mother was panicking on that front. He never did get COVID, but just his like, okay, so then the guys he met in prison, they all join up to have new bike protest. Like he's got this whole new network. Then everybody's protesting at Foley Square in front of the mayors, you know, and then like romances are blooming out of that. And, you know, like I just am hearing so much from my own children about like, granted, there was pent up frustration for everybody from being inside, but, you know, they are, and Narain, you know, Portland, my God, Portland's exploded. You could be in a protest, a dangerous protest, where you were really risking something every single night, you know? All right, anyway, I thought we were behind time, but we are now maybe on time. For this one, I'm not gonna call anyone. You just raise your hand if you wanna talk. And that is basically, it's a chance to give advice, because the audience for this panel is a bunch of adults, right? It's librarians, teachers, maybe some parents, but, you know, well-meaning adults who want nothing more than to help kids get their voices out there. So what advice do you have for us? Are there barriers that we're putting in front of you? And think back to your high school years, because I do think you're maybe freer once you're in college. What could adults do to help student voice get out there? Anybody who wants to talk, raise your hand. Oh, good, everyone. I don't know, I saw you first, Anushka, because you're the square under me. Go ahead.
Sure. So I think, so on the first front, like you can have a lot of students talk with each other, and it's great to have people kind of voicing their opinion in that very comfortable environment with their peers. But I think opportunities like this, where you can kind of see your voice exit like this safety space of your classroom or maybe a club you're in, are, I don't know, they're kind of like a realization point for yourself in knowing that, oh, I can say things that go outside. And then you kind of internalize this opinion you've had and like really go through with it and look through it, and you engage in a much larger conversation. So I think things like that, whether that's opportunities like larger national contests like the ones the New York Times holds, or even smaller writing competitions, etc., is always nice, because it's like, oh, I'm a part of something bigger than just maybe a small discussion.
Thanks. Who's next? Go ahead, Ananya.
At my school, at least, we have standardized writing tests, and a lot of when we do standardized writing tests, there's a lot of emphasis on hitting the rubric. We have our rubric, you have to get all 4 points, and there's emphasis on hitting each part of the rubric. And to do that, you need to write sort of in a formula type of way, which isn't really conducive to creating a creative atmosphere or actually getting good work down. So I feel like a lot of a good plan would be to get rid of that, or at least start breaking down some of those barriers, start breaking down that mentality of writing to get the perfect score instead of writing for yourself. I feel like that is super important, especially now. There's all this emphasis on testing, so.
Kabby could not be nodding harder, right, Kabby? You're like this. Yes, yes.
Thank you for saying that.
How much of your writing would you say is that formulaic, Ananya? Ananya, I'm saying it wrong, sorry.
I know for my article that I wrote for this, I completely tried to just scrap it. I didn't think of it at all. But if it's an assignment in class and it's a paper, I just instinctually go to it, because in some ways it's easier to do it sometimes because you know that that's what's going to get you the good grade. But honestly, I feel like if we're talking about what good writing actually is, there's a limit to how good your writing can be if you're using that formula.
Thank you. Somebody else. Go ahead, Narain.
Yeah, so I think in terms of advice, and we were talking about this earlier with allowing emotion or anger or whatever it is to kind of be the impetus for an editorial or writing in general. In some ways, I think that can kind of be Pandora's box. I think because sometimes older generations or teachers might have some resistance to the unconcealed anger or frustration that youth tend to express in their writing. And a lot of that can come from just like seeing as we grow up, a lot of people making pragmatic or conciliatory decisions when they have the chance to affect change. But I think as an educator or as a teacher, expect and appreciate when students take extreme positions. They're doing it because they care. They're doing it because they've seen a lack of progress for so long. And, you know, things are only extreme until they start to become common, and then they're no longer extreme. So appreciate when students take that risk to really go all or nothing with their perspectives, even if sometimes, you know, they might not be considering the other side as much as you'd want them to be doing.
And you feel like in school, extreme positions are not respected in that way, particularly?
Well, I just think I mean, in writing specifically, I think a lot of the time we're coached to always present the other side as a possibility, which is not a bad thing. And I think that's incredibly valuable to do, but that can sometimes be pushed into the pragmatic point of view, which is, you know, avoid what you really believe and try and focus on something that might appeal to a broader audience or people that you think will consider it from both angles, which, you know, I think can sometimes impede what you really believe. And like we talked about, the most valuable writing, the stuff where your voice really shows through, is when you're writing about what you care about. So.
Yeah, I can dovetail on that a little bit. I love that comment, Narayan. And I think that as an adult, I think it's really important that students feel like whatever topic that they decide to write on would be accepted by the teacher. And I think that's a climate thing that the students need to feel like, you know, no matter what I bring up, that my teacher would be supportive of it. For example, you know, in my classroom, I've had very, very super liberal topic ideas as well as very conservative topic ideas. And I am thrilled with either one. And I think that it's really important that students feel like they can express themselves no matter the opinion that they have. And I think as teachers, we have our own biases, and students, I think, are well aware of those by the time they reach this. And I think it's just really important that students feel comfortable that they can talk about whatever it is that they would like to talk about.
Nora, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, Nora, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is sort of similar to what like Ananya said, but I think that sort of formulaic style of writing is something that I was really also encouraged to do a lot in high school. And in particular with writing opinion pieces, I was like argumentative essays or op-eds for my school paper. I was really encouraged to write in a formulaic way and get the thesis statement being the last statement in the opening paragraph, you know, all that. But I think, you know, that this competition, I just kind of threw that out and just kind of wrote in a more creative way. And, you know, being in my first year of college, I'm taking a first year writing seminar. And, you know, my teacher is like, guys, don't be too formulaic. Like, it doesn't have to be, you know, exactly what, you know, you were taught to do in high school. And so I think sometimes that formula can be helpful with an argumentative essay, but you don't want it to be constraining. And then I think, you know, sort of echoing what everybody said, picking a topic that you're really passionate about does really help you get the ideas going and help you find your voice. And I think a lot of that can come from picking something that, you know, you have some semblance of credibility on, because I think, you know, taking on, you know, a contest from the New York Times, it does feel like, why should I as a student, you know, be offering my thoughts to the New York Times? But, you know, a piece on Animal Crossing, or, you know, your personal experience, or for me with my Instagram account, you know, having some sort of credibility with whatever you're writing about, I think goes a long way with helping you feel more secure in finding your voice, because you're able to feel that, you know, your opinion has some basis, and that you're the person who should be writing this piece, and that it couldn't be written better by, you know, the 50-year-old PhD who's been writing opinions his whole life.
Such a beautifully said and so true. And I will say, you know, who totally agrees with you is Nick Kristof, the Times op-ed columnist. He often will help out the Learning Network because he's a great guy. And he came on, Kabby was on this a few years ago. We did a webinar with him, and he said to students openly, you have authority on the issues you care about. And if you look at what the four of you wrote about, that is true for every one of you. Narayan had this terrible personal tragedy, which he managed to write about. And there's a huge part of the book about how you even did that, because that's amazing to me. Anushka, you know, started with a rant about a thing that just made her crazy. And even though she didn't want to write about it, she couldn't not write about it. Ananya, for all that you're saying, it's not deep, it's deep as hell. And it's, you know, really like, I don't know, we all loved that essay. Yours is the most freshest judged. And so I will tell you it was unanimous. And Nora, obviously, I mean, you're the one saying it, but yours is so perfect. I mean, here we are about to vote, and if anybody wants to, they should go and read her advice for the 2020 candidates, which kind of boils down to be authentic, because Generation Z is not gonna, like, doesn't put up with your snake oil, basically. So anyway, thank you guys so much for this. And I wanna, Kimberly, do you want,
well, Katherine, did you want to talk about the new contest for a minute, and then I'll wrap it up.
Okay, great. I feel like this is a little plug for our site, but also can you guys get the word out, please? It is the most ambitious contest we have ever run. It's only going to work if like every teenager in America participates. So like, come on. It's basically is the idea. We threw out all the normal contests we do this fall and we wrapped everything into one. And it's called Coming of Age in 2020. And the idea is that, oh my God, what an insane year. You know, coronavirus, fight for racial justice, wildfires if you're out west, you know, collapse of the economy. Let's not even, this election, Supreme Court openings, you know, it's mayhem, right? And it's daily mayhem. And all our lives are changing, but nobody's more affected than people you guys age. And so it's an invitation to have your say however you want. So it's not just writing, it's video, it's make a comic if you want, like record a song and, you know, do a video, you know, make a podcast, send us your pandemic diary, a picture, a piece of that if you want. Look on your camera roll. You might have something already great that you took this year. It doesn't have to be, it's artifacts, so it doesn't have to be perfect, or it could be something glossy that you've taken through many a step, and there's a chance for you to tell how you made what you made. Every single kid has to fill out an artist statement. So we'll be able to sort the stuff that's like, oh my God, I took this in the middle of a protest. It's not staged, you know, these were the circumstances, versus this is an op-ed that I wrote that, you know, I've massaged through many, a draft or whatever. So we're hoping to tell a story, as you guys could, I mean, you can see, it's not going to work if we only get the kind of kids who read the New York Times and whose parents read the New York Times and who win New York Times contests. That's not what we want here. We want to tell a broad story, and we want the kind of kids who think that maybe the New York Times doesn't cover their communities that well or doesn't feature their voices that often. We want every kind of kid. So, you know, pass it on.
Well, to everyone watching the panel, and, you know, Day of Dialogue has like, or the summit has like 12,000 registrants. So they won't be New York Times readers. They won't be New York Times kids. Can you give an easy link or a way for them to search for more information about this, Katherine?
I'm just going to tell you, Google is your friend here. Coming of Age, New York Times.
Okay.
It'll come right up. There are many, there are lesson plans, there are writing prompts, there's all kinds of stuff to help teachers do it if they want to do it, but you really just need to know the rules. So Coming of Age, New York Times.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we're sort of out of time, if such things are possible. I wanted to say, Katherine, would you hold up the book again while we thank W.W. Norton for having the vision to publish it, and for giving us this, and the student and the teacher guide. Congratulations all of the panelists for being included. It is not an easy portal to travel through. You're a very rare bunch, but I can see your impact is going to be huge. Thank you, Kabby, for joining today and talking about that perspective. We do have, our viewers will be educators, librarians, students, publishers, booksellers even, and they'll all be interested in this material. And well, I look forward to hearing from all of you. I can't wait to just see, knowing your names and watching where else you pop up. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you SLJ, and thank you WW Norton, and you guys are great. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.